If you look on the left-hand side, left bottom, there is a chat box, and that is where we would like you to post questions, particularly during the presentation. We have everyone on mute. A couple of things that we did want to bring to your attention, and that is that on the tomorrow, actually, in the afternoon, we're going to be hosting mostly for the education publishers, but we'll be hosting the software guide that we have published to the E-rate. And that's important, particularly in the K-12 space. So we'd like to get started. Just a last thing about the publications. We have some interoperability standards that are now available. Those are free. We are getting those out to anybody who is interested in the whole issue of content interoperability. And then we have some product evaluation guidelines and, of course, our expert's guide to the post-secondary market. So you should just go to the e-store if you're interested in seeing any of those. I think we are ready to go. We'll start with that, and I'm going to start, I guess, with our moderator, who's Glenn Gruber from Ness Technologies. So Glenn?
Yep. Karen,
Great.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'm not going to spend any time really introducing myself. I do work for Ness Technologies, and I'm in charge of our market development activities. But you guys are here to listen to our featured speakers, and I'm going to introduce them and then ask them each to provide a little bit of bio about themselves and the company for which they work. Starting with Joe Fish, who's the CTO of SmartPros. We also have Tom Grant, Senior Analyst at Forrester Research, and Neil Fox, who's the VP of Consulting also at Ness Technologies. Joe, would you take a minute to kind of just introduce yourself and SmartPros?
Sure. I'm Joe Fish. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of SmartPros. I've been here for 13 years. We're a New York-based e-learning company that delivers government and corporate mandated continuing education to more than 2 million professionals in over 120 countries.
Okay, thank you. Tom, why don't you introduce yourself to the group?
So I'm Tom Grant. I work at Forrester Research, where I have the good fortune of being able to study full-time how Agile is being adopted, as well as with other software methodologies, and just cover the whole area of software development and delivery in general. So that's what I do for a living.
Okay, thanks. And finally, Neil, if you can just give a brief introduction about yourself as well.
Sure. This is Neil Fox, and I'm the Vice President of our consulting group at Ness. For those of you not familiar with Ness Technologies, we are a global software product development provider. We partner with our clients in order to develop software applications, mostly those that generate revenue. My role in the company is to focus on optimizing software development processes with our clients, and that mostly means distributed Agile implementations.
Okay, thanks. Now, everyone, I think we're going to have a really great set of presentations today, great conversation. We got 3 people here who are very knowledgeable and interested in Agile development as well as building high-performance engineering teams. So what we wanted to do first was start with 3 really short polls just to get a sense of who's in the audience and maybe use that as part of the conversation as we go down the road. So the first one is whether or not your individual team in which you work is using Agile. So overwhelmingly, I guess it makes some sense for those who have chosen to listen to this. We do have 2/3 of the people roughly who are currently using Agile, so within their own teams. But next question is, to what extent has your entire company adopted Agile? Sometimes it's done in pockets. So are you a science experiment? Is it less than 25%? Are you at 25 to 50%, or is more than 50% of your organization using Agile today? So okay, it seems like we have a good mix. Not quite, a little bit more than half, under 50%, and I guess closer to 60-40 split there at this point. So it looks like we've got a good mix of experiences, and hopefully that you'll each get a lot of good takeaways from the presentation as we move forward. And then one last final poll question. How would you rate the performance of your development organization? And think of that in terms of predictability of scope, quality, time, and cost. Do you think that you're in the very top end against industry average in the top 25 percentile, about average in the 50+ percentile, or below 50%? Please feel free to be honest. No one is tracking who you are. So it looks like there's a lot of you who feel that there's a good opportunity for improvement. People who think that they're doing a good job, but part of today's conversation is how you can go from kind of good to great. And I know it's a big part of what Joe thinks about for SmartPros individually, what Tom looks at across the industry, and what Neil tries to do to help our clients. So I think that we'll have some really good conversations. So moving on, I want to turn this over to Tom Grant. All right, so Tom is going to try and help set some of the context today for the panel discussion that we're going to have following, talking about the state of Agile, changes going on in business that are maybe making changes in development practices, and touch on Forrester's view of what high-performance teams are. So Tom, turn it over to you.
Well, thanks very much, and I'll keep it relatively quick here so we can get into the interesting part of the discussion. But just to kind of set up the rest of the discussion for today, a few things that came out of the research. And by the way, as a Forrester researcher, I do feel privileged to have an opportunity, having stepped out of doing software development, to see the kinds of changes that are happening right now. And there are a lot of them. It's not just one change. I think it would be wrong to focus just on Agile or just on the role of social media or other often cited changes in the way that people build technology or relate to one another via technology. There have been a lot of business forces that have been conspiring to push us in the direction of some big changes, and there have also been some technology changes. So the question is, where are we now? Is it fundamentally at a point where it's the technology driving the change, or is it the people that are driving the change? So, oops, too far ahead there. Well, clearly we went through a kind of a period where we needed to first apply technology and innovate in the back office, and it's kind of moved into the hands of the average user. So for me, let's say if I want to set up my new cable service in my house, I first needed to be dealing with a company that could promptly deliver me the hardware needed in order to hook everything up. So that needed some significant innovation that had to happen on the manufacturing side and the distribution side. There needed to be in the hands of the people with whom I was dealing with, whether it was billing or orders or whatever, a significant amount of automation, and this was the information revolution that we all lived through and marveled at. But now what we're seeing is really that, at the point now where on my mobile device for me to program my DVR or to order a new DVR system, that's kind of the culmination of all these other changes. And we've been living with it long enough now that we've become pretty savvy about technology and what it should do for us. We've become increasingly dependent on technology to do our jobs. Technology is intertwined with business processes. In fact, if even one of these systems, whether it's ERP or just plain email, goes down, we all feel like our ability to be productive in our work has stopped suddenly, and we kind of like going home because really that's how much actually we do depend on all of these systems. There are a lot of them, and there are a lot of devices now that they're being delivered to, so it's also created a lot of complexity, the kind of innovation trajectory that I showed you in the previous slide. And it led to a fair amount of despair, which resulted in, among other changes, the inspiration for the Agile movement. Now, I'm not going to go through a history of Agile. I'm just going to give you the snapshot of where we are right now. Agile is pretty mainstream. And it is, as we've seen, has gone through a big spike of adoption in the last couple of years. 2009 was kind of the year, according to some metrics that we have, of Agile adoption when it seemed to gain significant momentum. And so now, if 1 in 3 of the teams I might join in my next job as a software developer or tester or business analyst or whatever is an Agile team, that's pretty darn mainstream. And it's more mainstream than many familiar names for other methodologies like CMMI and RUP and Spiral and so forth, much more mainstream than them at this point. So the statistics we saw in the poll actually are not that unrepresentative. I think probably people coming to the teleconference today are interested in Agile because a significant number of them are already doing it, but there are a lot of your brethren out there today. And it's also reached a point now where it's more than about just development. It's also about, just got to put some background noise there. Also about incorporating Agile into the business plan. So Agile is really, as you know, a team-level methodology. It's not a manifesto for how to change business, and yet it is a critical change in the way that an important moving part of business operates, the technology building and delivering part. So it's now increasingly part of people's larger scale business plans, and people are seeing benefits from Agile beyond just velocity. The stereotype of Agile being about just velocity is long dead. That what people are looking for is greater predictability, improved quality, all the kinds of benefits that you see in this slide, that they believe that moving to Agile can help them realize better. Now that doesn't come for free. There is a cost attached to any kind of disruptive transformation. And the cost in human terms, I would say nowadays, is, as we've seen, there's a lot more pressure on the teams themselves. Certain types of people do better in Agile teams. Certain kinds of skills are what people need to cultivate in order to be effective as a participant in a big Agile project. So here I think, kind of from our colleague Jeff Hammond, who kind of put into perspective some of the recent research on industrial psychology, is that the people who do well in these teams are ones who are innate problem solvers. They're motivated by the work. It's like someone said about me actually once in one of my former jobs, "Oh, I get it, you're all about the work." That's the kind of person you're looking for to be a high performer in a high performer team. And that's not necessarily kind of what everybody's ready for, but it's part of the transformation. And the good news is there's actually a lot of these sorts of people out there. If you measure intrinsic motivation, I do software development because I find it engaging and interesting, and I like to solve problems, and I like to have the technology bring about the sorts of business outcomes or social outcomes that we saw in the previous slide about the goals for Agile. If you measure just by open source contribution, there are a lot of people doing open source contribution out there. There are a lot of people who are intrinsically motivated, who are attracted to software development. So there is a kind of a rich vein to tap here. And that's important also because one of the things that we've relearned about software development in general, one of the things that Agile and other changes kind of dramatized for us is that software development is about problem solving. It's about puzzle solving. It's about anything that you could call heuristic kinds of work, where there's a great deal of latitude in how somebody engages in the problem space. There are a lot of different ways to code software in order to solve a problem. It's not algorithmic work where you just kind of give somebody a formula and then they just kind of hammer out the work until it's done. No, it is a creative enterprise where you do need high-performance people working on high-performance teams, and you really see that when you look at the numbers. When you sit down and figure out the kinds of people you need on the team, and if you have the choice between a whole lot of relatively inexpensive people and just kind of throwing bodies at software development problems versus a much smaller, more elite cadre of people who are really good at their jobs and really motivated at them, the payoff is really in hiring the really good people. That Agile really gives everybody the opportunity to unlock their potential and really puts some demands on them to actually unlock that potential as well, because moving at the pace of Agile, learning how to deliver working code at every iteration, those are tough challenges, and they're going to, again, kind of be the ones where people will hopefully rise to that particular challenge presented to them. So those are all kind of the results of some research that I had for some opening remarks. Now let's turn it over to some people out there in the trenches.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, so now we're going to move to the panel conversation part of today's webinar. And the first section we're going to talk about is Agile adoption, clearly a trend as outlined by the statistics from Tom, but it's not, and Tom also alluded to that there are some, it's not for everybody. So what are some of those challenges? It's not quite as easy as it sounds. So Neil, let me start with you, and maybe you can provide, from what you've seen, what are the kind of the top 3 critical success factors for a company to successfully embrace Agile development?
So I think Tom did a good job setting the stage. Some other things I would think about as high priority is when you're either adopting Agile or, like a lot of our audience today, have already adopted it, but maybe looking to get more out of their development process. The first one I would highlight is that Agile is not a development process. It is a culture, a philosophy. It is an approach to software development that is supported by the process and tools and lots of artifacts and rituals, etc. But the first thing to do is recognize that this is a cultural change for your company and not just for software development. Unless you've got the business involved, it's not going to be successful ultimately. The second one is as important as the rock star developers are in the slide that Tom showed. I would highlight the product owner as an even more important role to invest in. A lot of the companies that I visit and spend time with either don't have a product owner or really haven't considered the importance of that role. Without having somebody with a very clear vision and a lot of respect inside the organization and the ability to make decisions, the Agile development team, no matter how great the developers are, will not have the clear vision and prioritization required to be successful. And the last one that I highlight is transparency is critical to success. If you're an organization out there that is using task boards, physical task boards on whiteboards or bulletin boards or Windows, the way I've seen a lot of folks, that's a great methodology and it gets people involved and there's great advantages to it. But it doesn't provide all of the metrics that the team can use to be effective. If you're small and co-located, then task board and Post-it notes are just fantastic and maybe the best way to go about things. But if you're large and you're looking to scale to multiple teams and distributed development, then using an application lifecycle management tool and deciding on what metrics are best for your organization to achieve your business objectives is one of the first things that I would do. Make sure that we're measuring the right things to align development in the business, and then review those metrics on a regular basis, not to beat people over the head with, but to use to ask the right questions and make clear business decisions that are based on objective information.
All right, fantastic, Neil. I know that we're definitely going to get to metrics and measuring success a little bit later on, so we'll put a pin in that for the moment. Tom, you obviously, in your research talked to many companies. Do you have other things that you might add to what Neil outlined?
Well, it seems like there are a couple of things that correlate really strongly with success. One certainly is kind of the approach to it that Neil just said, that this is more than just mechanistic techniques that we're adopting. It is a worldview about software development, and it's a healthy change of perspective. It's about adaptation and experimentation and the assumption from the very beginning that we don't know everything about the project that we're working on, that we'll need to. We'll discover a lot along the way. So those kinds of principles and the discipline to really navigate through uncharted waters is one aspect of it. And the other part of it is having executives who are willing to be sponsors of that journey of discovery, that they're willing to give the resources needed in order to make fundamental transformation happen, that they're willing to allow people to experiment and fail. Because as with any discipline, when you're learning something for the first time, or as you're going to the next level of mastery, you're going to fail. I mean, there are things that are not going to work at times, and it's going to be okay to hit the mat every once in a while and learn from that little bit of bruising and get up and do it right the next time. That is the role that your executives or other leaders in the organization have to play in allowing that to happen.
Excellent stuff. Now, Joe, I just wanted to touch on one thing because I know when we spoke earlier, this was an issue for you, an important point for you. Neil and Tom referred to culture. Can you talk about that as a success, critical factor for SmartPros in adopting Agile?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The whole idea that this is not a one-size-fits-all process, but it's a cultural change is absolutely dead on. If you don't recognize that, and if you don't work to make sure that you deliver that message on a continuous basis from the top down, you're probably not going to succeed. And it's all about continuous improvement too. So if things aren't working, as Tom said, you've got to be willing to make changes. You've got to be willing to fail. Otherwise, you're going to fail. You also need a champion. You've got to have somebody who can manage and adapt the process, who really believes in it. I'm fortunate enough to have such a person in my Mumbai office who, takes the direction and really effectuates change. And when something isn't working, he quickly points it out, quickly finds some other way to deal with the situation and move on.
Okay, thanks. Actually, that's a pretty good segue to the next question, which is, when you're moving towards using Agile in a globally distributed manner, and particularly when working with outsourcing firms, what needs to change? And Tom, maybe you could start off first a little bit. I know that Forrester's done some research in looking at Agile adoption by outsourcing firms. How does that compare to how that's being, what those numbers look like first, what they are for most in-house development shops?
Yeah, well, what we find, and I won't bore everybody with the statistics, I'll just jump to the punchline, but what we find is it's hard, but doable. We've always known that geography would be a potential barrier to Agile, whether or not you were talking about people in your own team who were working in a different time zone, or whether they were working for an outsourcing company with whom you were contracting. It seems like the organizational barrier, however, has been a bit broader because, not necessarily because of just the way that the contractual relationships work, or whether or not people have different tools that they're using. All those are contributing factors. But if there's really kind of at the bottom of the snarl of problems that people have experienced, kind of one thing that you could yank on, and if you could pull that free, then you'd probably start some other changes to unravel as well, and that is stop treating people in the other organization or in the remote team in your own organization as people you throw things over the wall to. That's pretty heavily supported in the statistics we have and in the interviews that we've done, is if you don't treat them as part of the team, and you don't expect that of them, that they're going to have transparency to you, there's that transparency word again, that really they're going to operate as if they were in the same room and as part of the same organization, it's going to be tough for Agile to succeed in that scenario.
Right. So I think Neil is going to try and answer one of the questions that we have in our chat box. Neil?
Yeah, so the question is, how do we wean customers from a detailed fixed scope contract or contracts? Is there a risk mitigating contract structure that encourages Agile without simply devolving into T&M? This is a really good question as it pertains to where the trajectory of software development is going to. I think Tom would agree, and we've seen over and over again, that companies don't want to pay for time and materials. They don't want to just pay for people to do their best. They want to pay for outcomes. They want to pay for delivery, and that's what got people into this fixed price, detailed contract approach. But the problem there is that you spend most of your time managing change orders. As we know, software development is an inexact science, and certainly partially an art. And so the problem with fixed price approaches is that you don't spend your time developing as much software as you could. You wind up negotiating most of the time. So our approach with clients has been to use an agile methodology and do a price based on story points. So you get the benefits of a dynamic and responsive development organization, and you get a fixed budget based on delivery rather than time and materials. So there's a lot of detail to that, obviously. There has to be good agreement on the acceptance criteria and when stories are elaborated and tracked, et cetera. But we've solved that issue, and it's going quite well with several of our clients.
Yeah, I think that those are all good points, and certainly, tying back actually to some of the numbers in the Forrester research, I think that a lot of, one of the key, points is that a lot of people talk about, doing Agile, especially with some of the offshore firms, but I think the statistics, Tom, if I recall correctly, are some of the larger offshore firms are doing in the 4 or 5% range of their engagements, where Neil, I think to the point you were making, Ness works on, uses Agile in almost half of their engagements. So
that's correct.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So
yeah, go ahead.
All right, I was just going to move on to the next part of this. So, Joe, I want to kind of throw this back to you a little bit. It was mentioned before about having, I think Tom mentioned about having, executive buy-in as being a big part of success. Can you talk a little bit about, in your specific example, how has Agile really helped SmartPros? But talk about it not just from your role as CTO, but just as a general top-line executive and the role that maybe the rest of the executive team took.
Yeah, sure. Our Agile has really given us a leg up in our executive management team as well, because there's just better visibility and transparency into what's going on with their projects. Everyone feels a greater sense of the I team as being partners and helpful, as opposed to a closed box mentality or process that you might see in other organizations. And I attribute that to the Agile process and everything that's going on within it. We also are enjoying a greater frequency of releases with our product, and far higher quality. And we can react better to client change requests. Our teams feel a greater sense that they're involved in the business decisions instead of simply doing what they're told. And budgetarily, it's been a tremendous success as well. We had about a 3-month, 4-month ramp-up period. We moved everything into the process, and now we're doing today twice the work in half the time, with a greater degree of quality than we ever had before. So it's been a huge success for us.
That's excellent to hear, certainly, and I think for those who are contemplating diving deeper into Agile, hopefully that's a good anecdote that they can try and use to sell up to their other people in the organization. So I want to move over to another area, and Joe, actually you coined this phrase of being the instant Agilist. As you and I spoke, Agile adoption for many people can be an ideological decision, but it wasn't really for you. Agile was something that worked and met a lot of your needs. But maybe you could talk a little bit about why Agile was the right move for you, and what you mean by the instant Agilist.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, our software product, our main software product, has been out for a good number of years now, and as we grew, and began to scale out several years ago, we really started to realize that how we were managing our development effort just wasn't working, and we needed a better process. But a better process that still could allow us to remain nimble and responsive to what our clients ask us to do. So we really had to become agile, and it was one of the main factors in my selecting Ness to start our relationship, is that Ness was able to demonstrate this to us. They armed me with success stories and case studies. So my job of convincing the company at large that Agile would work for us was a lot easier, and it really allowed me to cut through the resistance much easier. And I mean resistance in terms of developers and other managers in the company. Certainly it can be difficult for some programmers to make that change from kind of a tell me what to do methodology to being an active participant and taking ownership in what it is that we're creating and why we're creating it. It's a big difference. And Ness really brought that to the table for us in such a way that we could leapfrog nearly all of the stumbling blocks that you might have in trying to just baby step your way into it. And we just leapt in. We leapt in feet first, and we've been successful at it.
Okay, fantastic. Now, Neil or Tom, either of you feel free to jump in. But is this kind of story typical of companies looking to adopt Agile? Can either of you speak to that?
I'll speak to it just real quickly. I think it's typical in two ways. One is jumping in feet first is good. I mean, a certain amount of commitment like that to say, okay, we're going to do it and we're going to make it work, and we're going to work with somebody who really knows what they're doing here, whether it's as an outsourced partner or as a coach that's going to help Agile adoption spread in our own organization. So that's good. I'd say the other part of it is thought leadership. I had the great good fortune to work on once a research project on what is thought leadership really, and it actually turns out to be critical in two parts of a project. Certainly, there's the one everyone thinks of. I want to work with a thought leader as a vendor. That's at the kind of the moment of selection of vendors who are going to be involved in the project. But it's also at the very beginning when the project is being conceived. And at that point, when people need to know what's really possible, what are the things we didn't think of before because we didn't really think it was possible, and how could someone help shape our expectations in some new way? But that's also really critical. So that's the other part of the story I think that we just heard that's important to underline as well.
Okay. All right, so I want to try and turn the conversation kind of the last point, talking about high-performance teams. This was a big part of the conversations that I heard at the Forrester's Application Development Forum in the fall, and I think one that's should be interesting to a lot of people. Maybe I can start with Joe. As not someone who was involved in that research, but how do you define a high-performance team? How do you look at that for SmartPros?
Well, it's really, my definition is a team that truly embraces ownership of the work that they're doing. They may have special skills, but they have to work as a team and push back, suggest, and collaborate while producing excellent results. I mean, if they don't do that, they're not going to be a high-performance team. And in my model, in what we're doing here, if not for a high-performance team doing what it is that we're doing, I don't think we would have the success that we have now.
Okay, and Tom, I mean, how does that kind of view compare to how Forrester defined high-performance teams? You guys were very prescriptive in what you felt that meant.
Yeah, I mean, I would include that in the description. I would certainly look for other indicators like how people look at change to the work plan as another key indicator of what high performance is. Certainly by productivity measures, you'll see what it means to be a high performance team. But it's also, a lot of times I think we find teams that are willing to embrace some kind of crazier metrics, that they're willing to embrace the, let's say, responsibility for business outcomes over which they don't have complete control. That they're contributing to them certainly by building the technology, but that they're conscientious that there's more to it than just kind of handing off the technology and waving goodbye. So, and I think, as we just heard, ownership is a big part of that, and you can see that tangibly in sometimes the metrics that people are willing to be measured by, or the tools that they use to see the flow of value through the whole software development and delivery system. That's another clear sign of a high-performance team.
Yeah. So that transitions nicely to the next point of how do you know if you have a high-performance team? And I know one of the areas that we want to talk about is how do you measure success? Neil, I know that metrics and measurement and understanding how that ties into the effectiveness of the engineering organization is a topic that's near and dear to your heart. So do you want to pick up on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to kind of chime in here. So I agree with Tom's point about metrics. There's a number of elements of software development that I think you can tell whether the team is on track, are they high performing or not. One of them, as Tom said, is productivity, and there was a question that was asked earlier about measuring productivity. Our approach is to use acceleration as a good indicator of productivity change over time. So I think it's very hard to measure pure productivity given that story points and velocity may vary from one team to another, but you can use the current velocity of a sprint as a change from the last number of average sprints. So, call it the last 3 or 4 sprints. So what are we doing in this past sprint as compared to the average of the last several sprints? And you can see whether the productivity is improving or devolving. And one of the indicators of a high-performance team is that their productivity should go up. You should see a velocity curve that has a trend line in the upper right-hand corner direction, because one of the things that high-performance teams do very, very well is they self-actualize. They identify elements of improvement. One of the patterns that I like a lot is something called scrumming the scrum. If you're not familiar with it, you can Google it and see some research that was done on identifying in your retrospective the one biggest improvement to make, rather than the 3 questions that are typically asked in kind of Agile training. You'll see velocity improve there. The other point that I wanted to make about high-performance teams is you can tell that they're high performance when they take accountability and when they take their commitments extremely seriously. So, the scope variance in a sprint, as measured by whatever tool you might be using, should be as close to 0 as possible. When the team takes up the stories themselves and they commit to a certain set of stories for that sprint, they move heck and high water in order to deliver those things, and they do it through teamwork and not through individual heroism. Now, some of the other metrics that I really like are predictability metrics. So looking at variances from commitments is a really, really good way to tell whether your team and even yourself are managing the software development effectively. So variances from schedule, scope, quality, value points if you're using those, cost, budget, things like that. So one of the things that our clients really, really want to try to count on is predictable results. And looking at variances from your commitments is a good way to judge whether you're predictable or not.
Okay. Tom, anything that you would add to that?
Boy, I love what he just said. Because predictability is one of those things that I think gets still a little bit underrated, and yet whether you're an IT organization or an ISV or whomever you are, predictability is of huge business consequence. So being able to be more predictable is, I think, a great measure, and that goes to the heart of how well you're able to plan as a team, how well you're able to understand the requirements, how effectively you can size work items. And it also really gets into, I think, the nub of the team dynamic, and that this is a high-performance team, not a team that happens to have a couple of high-performance players. You learn things with Agile such as the more turnover in the team, the more disruption you do to your ability to plan because you don't know what the team is really capable of if you keep changing it. So it's those sorts of team-conscious dynamics and team-conscious metrics that are going to be really important. And no heroics. That should be a T-shirt you hand out on the first day of learning how to do Agile, because if you see situations where there's still somebody, Bob or Jane, who's doing just a heroic job, and everyone else on the team isn't learning how to work better as a team, then the knowledge that Bob or Jane has in some specific domain area isn't being transferred along. Whatever the problem is that's requiring heroics, there is something fundamentally broken about your team, and it has to be fixed if you're ever going to be achieving the kind of productivity or other sorts of gains you're looking for out of Agile.
And one other point, Tom, that I'll add to that comment about predictability is that you can look at predictability in any given sprint or release, but then track those things over time. So what I recommend to our clients is that they develop the commitment and predictability index based upon what's important to them, scope, schedule, quality, cost, even capacity, right? Is our capacity predictable, or are people stealing our resources? And then plot those things over time so you can determine whether you're getting more predictable or less predictable as your Agile initiative takes hold and as you guys mature as an organization.
Yeah, you're not a high-performance team unless you're serious about retrospection, because otherwise you're just a legend in your own mind, honestly.
All right, this is all great stuff. What I want to jump to now is to go to the Q&A. We've got a number of questions that have been coming in, a couple on Twitter as well as through the chat. So I just want to try and hit a few of these before we run out of time. One thing I wanted to touch on, Tom, and one of the comments that you made is talking about the heuristic work, the problem-solving work. There's a bit of a balance sometimes that people are concerned about of letting the art of software development flourish, perhaps at the expense of coding standards and consistency, and making sure that person to person, team to team, that people that the code will be manageable and sustainable, both architecturally, but also as the next team member kind of comes in. So, can you talk a little bit about that balance?
Yeah, I think in talking about self-organizing teams and how people get creative sometimes in the blend of Agile practices that they're using, because the norm is not orthodox Agile. It's mixing Agile with other things, or not doing everything necessarily that is, perhaps what you find in a book about Agile. What we kind of find is where the gears mesh with other teams or other people. I mean, you kind of alluded to one of those situations where if you're doing things a little bit too wild and woolly and you can't on-ramp people, or you're building up technical debt like mad, that's going to be something that future generations of developers and testers on the team are going to have to deal with. That's clearly not good. So, in the discipline of learning, let's say, how to build a system you've never learned before, you shouldn't abandon some practices that reduce technical debt or help knowledge transfer to new team members. As I said, though, the other part of the story here is kind of the meshing with other groups. And if there is such a dark art to what's happening in the development team, so dark that it can't be explained to outsiders, then business users can't adapt to whatever changes Agile is wreaking. People involved in the operations team, in deploying the software, are going to be even more nervous than they were before as the number of releases ramps up. So, and that's kind of, I think we have to be conscientious about the experimentation that happens within the team still has an output to the outside world, whether it's the ops team or the business users or whomever, and kind of have to temper your experimentation practices that way.
Okay. Joe or Neil, anything to add on to that one? silence being assent, I'll move on to the next question. Joe, I've got one question that came in for you. Could you talk about, from your perspective, some of the best practices related to partnering with offshore resources? What do you do about time shifting or just overall structure?
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, it's been a constant mantra of one team. It's one team, and some of my peers that I've spoken to that have gotten into offshoring, Agile, they still have not, in some cases, grasped the concept that if you treat the offshore team as an offshore team and as a separate team, you're probably doomed to failure, or at least doomed to not having a very good productivity. My mantra to everyone is, this is one team. We have all of our employees, and I refer to them as employees even though technically they're not my employees, in our Mumbai location all have SmartPros phones, VoIP phones on their desk. They have SmartPros 5-digit extensions. They show up in our corporate directory, and if I hear somebody discuss an us-them type of mentality, I don't put up with it. And that's got to be something that from the top down that you do. The other thing that's very important is to make sure that you instill in the team the belief, the true belief that you're asking them to collaborate. You're not asking them to just do things. Here's something I need for you to create. Here's the scope, create it. No, what I'm asking for is I'm asking for each and every one of those individuals to think about what prior experience they've had maybe could be applied to this process or this business challenge that we're trying to code to, and come up with some innovative ideas. And the whole self-actualization of the team, and when you see it begin to happen, it's beautiful, because you go from a tell me what to do kind of process and conversation to people challenging you and asking questions. And I always tell them, I'm not the smartest person in the world, obviously. I know you're not, but I have experiences and you have experiences, and between the two of us we can come up with some kind of an innovative concept, process, program to meet the needs that we're trying to meet as a business. And it's a constant mantra. You have to continuously reinforce it, both from your folks in the U.S., your folks overseas, contractors, whoever. They all need to really, truly believe that they are part of one team.
Excellent. Okay, so I have another question that came in, and we're getting towards the end of the hour. So this may be the last one. We're tracking all the additional questions that have come in, and we will try and get back to everyone with responses for those. But this one's was directed at Tom, but I know that Neil, you probably have a perspective on this too. Tom, the question was really, and I don't know if you have data for this, but what percentage of companies that implement Agile at scale, and you can maybe say what you think that means of what at scale is, provide the right amount of resources to implement the transition?
Well, a lot more than there used to be, happily. I think that message has sunk in that you don't do this for free. So if you look at it as, say, one measure is, do people invest in tools? You're making a transformation where it's going to be really important if you can automate testing, or if you can really do task management a lot better than you used to through spreadsheets. That there's a significant tools investment that people are willing to make up front. Also, you don't see as many people nowadays doing the I read a book on Agile and now we're going to make this big change sort of scenario. That there are people who do, at significant numbers, the majority will invest in coaching and training, bringing somebody in to really help them learn it and on an ongoing basis kind of do mid-course corrections and however they're adopting the Agile practices. So much better than it was at the start when people were doing it in the closet sometimes and with no help and afraid that other people might find out unless they get misunderstood what's going on. And I think we're now seeing a lot more of the Agile transformation in the open, with the kind of transparency that we were talking about earlier today.
Okay. And Neil, I know that you've helped a number of companies throughout your career adopt Agile, and you've provided some of that coaching directly. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what that process is, and if people are contemplating it, what kind of investment should they be thinking about?
Yeah, so I agree with Tom that certainly it's better than it used to be, but I don't think people truly appreciate the cultural change and the company change in order to get to a full Agile approach. A lot of the companies that I work with, they still do see it as a development process change. They might not think about the tools that are required, but think even less about the amount of coaching, the amount of time that it will take in order to get the benefits of Agile. So, I think we all on this call at least, believe that Agile helps lead to the self-actualization and high-performing teams that were mentioned earlier. But in order to get the benefits out of it, you do need to invest in time and energy. I would say executive sponsorship is absolutely mandatory, because without that, people won't take it seriously, and it'll be a fun little experiment that will often revert back to people's comfort zone, which I've seen many times. So, my sense is that one level investment has to be time and energy from the executive sponsorship and from the business management. Without the business invested, as I said earlier, you will just ultimately not be successful. So I think that Tom is right that you're seeing more of a recognition, mostly based on Agile failures, that doing this as a grassroots level just here and there is probably not going to give the results that are needed. The other point that I'll mention is that there are companies that decide not to go fully Agile intentionally. They want to take some of the concepts from Agile, like a prioritized backlog and daily stand-ups, but they may decide for whatever reason to be more iterative and keep development and QA separate. And they recognize they're not going to get all the benefits, but due to a lack of either desire, attention, funding, whatever the constraints might be, they might pick and choose some elements from Agile, and I think that's fine, as long as they get some benefits from it.
Okay, that's great, and I think we're going to kind of wrap this up in just a minute. So I want to let everyone know, I saw one question just now, copies of the presentation will be available at some point post the webinar. I'm sure that there will be a follow-up email to everyone. We will try and get to all the questions that we haven't had a chance to address right here on the webinar, and get back to everyone. If you have any additional questions, you can send an email directly also to Neil at neil.fox@ness.com. And if you want to learn a little bit more about what we're doing and what Neil is leading with helping companies improve their software engineering effectiveness, and Agile is a big part of that. You can also check out the nesseffect.com, just nesseffect.com website. And I believe we've got a couple of closing announcements, and then everyone can enjoy their afternoon.
Yes, this is Karen Billings again from SIIA, and I do want to offer my thanks to the participants on the call today. I think you provided a lot of good information, and I saw a lot of great questions, and I know that they will be trying to answer them. We will also try and capture them so that if nothing else, people can get back to you. So do respond to the post-webcast survey, which should be happening soon. It will come up as soon as you log off. And then if there are any SIA working groups or committees that would be of interest, you should go to the division that you're most interested in if you're a member, either content or software or education, and look to see what kinds of working groups we have, because there are a number of them, and we believe that by getting actively involved in these, you're going to get the most out of it. Again, a thank you to the folks who put this together, all of the folks at Ness, particularly the member who originally proposed this and got it going. And that, I think, Gretchen, I know you're largely responsible. Thank you to all of the participants, and we look forward to having you on the next webcast that you'd like to join. Thank you.